After lots of trial and error, I'm going to show you how to make an embroidered patch at home in just a few simple steps. Now before we get into the video, the materials you're going to need, you're going to need an embroidery machine, your stabilizer, the fabric that you're going to be using, so I use faux leather with that backing. Then you're going to obviously need threads, scissors just to trim it up, and you'll need the file ready to go, so you can either digitize it or buy a file, and that's all you're going to need. Alright, so first things first, this is the patch that I made, and then I made another one and I actually put it onto this hat from my brand. As you can see, it's just nicely on the front there. But of course you can put patches on whatever you want. You can make them just to sell as a patch. You can put them on backpacks, you can put them on denim jackets, put them on whatever you want. Alright, so getting straight into it, I'm going to show you how I digitize my patch. So as you can see, I used a method where there's actually fabric in the patch. You don't have to do that, but that's what I'm going to show. So it's an applique method. Alternatively, you could skip the digitizing process if you buy a patch design ready to go, but I will show you what I did. So starting with a blank project in Hatch, I'm just going to set my hoop size, which is 10 by 10, and add the grid lines, and then I'm just drawing a simple rectangle here. I'm going to make it a satin stitch, move it to the middle, and then I like to change from auto spacing to manual spacing and turn it down to 0.3. I find this just makes the lines a bit more dense. And then I'm also going to change the width to 4. I just find a wider satin stitch looks a bit neater and gives more room for error with cutting fabric as well. If you don't quite like the sharp edges that the rectangle gives you, you can also digitize a closed shape from scratch, and then what you kind of do is when you get to the corner, you do a left click for a straight line, a right click on the corner, and another left click down at the next corner. This just smooths the corners out a bit so they're not so harsh. Then as you can see, it's not a perfect rectangle, so you've got to go back through and reshape it a bit, but I think it's worth it for me to spend the time doing this, as I don't like the harsh look of the normal rectangles, but again, completely up to you. But for the sake of this tutorial, I'm just going to show you with a simple rectangle, as that is easier to do. So as you can see, I'm just redrawing the rectangle, making it a satin stitch again, changing my manual spacing and changing my width to what I want it to be. Now the width will move and change if you make the rectangle bigger or smaller, so just be mindful of that. You might need to adjust it a few times. Now I've just pasted in my design that I want within the patch, and then I'm just adjusting my patch to be the right size. You could make the rectangle after you've inserted your design, so you don't have to resize it, but it really doesn't matter since it's just a simple shape. And then I've just readjusted the width to 4. Then I'm just making the satin stitch the same color as my design, as that's what I want, but of course make it whatever color you would like it for it to be. Then what I'm going to show you is you need to duplicate the design by right clicking on it, which is what I've done. Then select a single run, and since my fabric's pre-cut, I like the single run to be close to the edge of the satin stitch, but I'd make it closer to the inside of the satin stitch if I were to cut my fabric afterwards, as that would give more room to have a bit of extra fabric when you cut around the stitching if you're cutting your fabric once it's been stitched down. Then you're going to duplicate it again. If you're cutting your fabric afterwards, you're going to leave it as a single run to cut around. If you pre-cut your fabric like me, you're going to put a zigzag in. This zigzag is going to stitch the fabric in place that's already pre-cut. So that's what that is there. Then you're just going to resequence the design. As you can see, I'm just dragging my satin stitch to the end because we want to do the design first, and then we want to do the outside of the patch last. Now what I didn't show here is you actually need to move the single stitch and the zigzag stitch to the beginning, because that's going to show you the placement. So it would do those single stitch and zigzag, then the design, and then it's going to come through and do the satin stitch to finish it all off. You can stitch the satin stitch out first, but since I'm using a tearaway stabilizer, I just find it works better. So just as a refresher, you're going to want to do a single run, and then that's going to show you where to put your fabric. Then you're either going to do another single run for you to cut around your fabric, or you're going to do a zigzag to hold your fabric in place. Then you're going to go through with your design, and then finally you're going to do the satin stitch to finish it off, and that's all there is to it. So this is the machine that I'm going to be embroidering the patch on. First things first, I'm going to do the usual. I'm going to turn the machine on and I'm going to oil it just to get it ready so that it just keeps the machine running better for longer. Now, since I am pre-cutting my leather before I actually stitch it down, I'm going to show you a little hack that I saw. This is a patch that I did with a different color thread just to test it out. But basically I need to cut the leather exactly to this size. So I'm going to show you a very simple way to do that in just a minute. So first things first, for this little hack, I'm just going to hoop some cutaway stabilizer. As you can see, it's not filling the whole hoop because it's just enough for the patch and it's really just a guideline. Then I'm going to go put this on the machine. You can see I have added this here because I'm using magnetic hoops. It just provides a little bit of extra support for the hoop to stop it dropping down and just makes things that little bit more accurate. So once I've hooped that up, I'm going to head over to my machine. So now that you're over at the machine, what you're going to do is you're going to get it to stitch that first outline. So I know I've got 2 patches there, but I'm just going to embroider one for this video, but it's just to show you can do multiple patches at once if they fit within the hoop. But what you're going to do is you're going to hit stop so that it stops after this first outline, or you can just manually stop it when it's done, and then it's just going to stitch out onto the stabilizer. So we'll get that going. Now that it's done that, as you should be able to see, there's like a little rectangle where it's stitched. So all you're going to do is you're going to take it out of the hoop and you're going to get scissors and cut along that line. Once you've cut along that line, you're going to be left with something that looks like this. I've just written on there, updated leather patch cap template, so I know what it's for. And then you're just going to take this onto your fabric, so for me the faux leather, trace it around and cut exactly that, and then you're all set to go. Super simple. Right, now the stabilizer and fabric that you use for your patch is going to affect the neatness. I have been using this water solved stuff, so it tears away, but also it can wash away if there's any little bits missing. It's just plastic, see-through sort of film looking. I will be trying the Madeira badge film. I've read good reviews about that. It's pretty similar but a bit stronger from what I believe. The reason I like to use the stabilizer that I do is I have tried other types. I've tried cutaway, and then what you do with that is you cut around the patch once it's done as close as possible, and then you can use a lighter to try and clean it up a bit, but I don't, unless the stabilizer is the same color as the satin stitch of the border, I don't find it looks as clean because you can see that little bit. If that's the look you're going for though, or you don't mind, completely fine to use. That's another easy method, and it doesn't involve any trimming of the fabric before the stitching's done. That's still a good option. You can also use other tearaways, but I find it's going to leave little bits sticking out through the satin stitching at the end, which normally can be trimmed and cleaned up with a lighter, but again, I just don't think it looks as neat. So from all my experience, I find this is the neatest way to go, and it's my preference. And then for my actual patch, I'm going to be using this faux leather. As you can see, it's got some backings just to help stop it fraying and help keep it all together. So that's what I'm going to be using. You can use any tearaway stabilizer, but if you use stabilizer that's more like this papery sort of feel, it's more likely to leave little bits of white sticking out when you tear it away, which isn't a big deal for a lot of people, but I personally like my patches to be as clean looking as possible, which is why I use the film stuff, because it's clear and it just looks neater in my opinion at the end. One thing to note with the material that you're actually using for your patch, if you're using a material that frays easily, that's not going to be as nice, it's not going to look as neat, because when you cut around it, when you're stitching, it might fray a little bit and then it's not going to come up to the edge of the satin stitch, or it's just more likely to fray in the long run. So if you're using a material that frays easily, I would suggest putting some iron-on fusible interfacing, something just to give it a bit more structure, keep it together, which is again why I like what I was using, but it's completely up to you. I know another common backing people use is patch twill, which looks just kind of like a canvas sort of material. That has a nice look as well. So it's really up to you, whatever you want to try, you can use. All right, so I've now got this hooped up. I've got 2 layers here. I've got a bit of excess off the bottom. That's nothing to worry about. It's not going to make any difference. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to program stops on my embroidery machine after that single stitch outline and after the zigzag, because I want it to stop each time to give me time to position my fabric and just to make sure that it's holding my fabric, and then it's just going to embroider as normal after that. But I'll pop this on and I'll show you it stitching out. Just to note, because we did already do that first stitch just to get the outline, we're just going to need to reset our machine back to number 0 so that it knows to go from the start. And then to program the stops on my machine, it just looks like a hand saying stop. You just tap that and it's going to stop at the end of that color. I don't know if you've got a different machine how it would work, but I'm assuming it's fairly similar. Otherwise, as I said before, you can just manually stop it if you keep an eye on it. So anyways, we're going to get started, and it's going to do that first placement stitch. Now that that first stitch is done, we're going to take our piece of fabric and we're just going to line it up over there. So now if you want to put a few pieces of tape just to hold it a bit more secure and stop it moving, you can. I like to slide the machine off so it's easier to reach. And once I've lined it up, I'm just going to put some tape on there. Doesn't really matter what kind of tape you use. I'm just using heat-proof tape. This is what I've got lying around. But you could use masking tape or just normal tape, whatever works. And then you're going to get the machine to do the next stitch. After that's done, I'll just go ahead and tear that bit of tape away, and then it's ready just to finish off. You can just set and forget. Now, if you were doing a method where you put the fabric down and then cut it afterwards rather than pre-cutting your fabric, that would have been just a single straight stitch around instead of a zigzag. So now you take the hoop out of the machine, you'd get scissors and you trim as close as possible as that line without trimming the line, and that way then the satin stitch will cover it. I just find when you've got fabrics that don't fray and it's a simple outline like a rectangle or a circle, it's just easier for me to pre-cut the fabric first, but again, completely up to you. Alright, so now that the machine's finished embroidering, you're just going to want to take it off from the machine, unhook your project. Then you're literally just going to tear it away. So you've got 2 layers. So you just tear and then just tear it away. There's going to be a few loose threads just to trim up. But this is essentially what it's going to look like. I'll just trim it up and then show you the finished product. So I just trimmed a few of those loose threads, and then this is the final product. So you've got that one, and then this is another one of the ones made. Same process. Here it is on the hat. This was made with the exact same method, and then I actually stitched it to the hat. You can see from the inside the stitch lines. So I just took it to the sewing machine and stitched around. I did use an iron-on to start with just to hold it in place while I stitched. I used the Heat and Bond Light. You can use the Heat and Bond Ultra Hold if you want just to have a sew-on patch. So what you do is you'd cut the area of the patch with the Ultra Hold. You'd iron it on following the instructions, then when you peel it, you can press it directly onto whatever you want, which is a great option if you're selling patches or you don't have a sewing machine. And if you do want to shop one of these hats, they're actually available on my website now. It's www.onestopstitch.square.site. You can see I've got a little bit of branding on the back that I've embroidered, as well as that patch on the front. I hope that video was helpful for you. Thank you for watching, and as always, subscribe if you want to see more like this, and stay tuned for more.